How's it going, everybody? So today I want to make a video talking about my thoughts on the New King James. Now, this is going to be a little bit different because I'm not really going to talk about, necessarily its textual basis, where it comes from, because the truth is I think that's well-trodden ground. A lot of people have already made videos about it or well discussed it. But in particular, I want to talk mainly about its my thoughts on it. And there's a video that's gone around that I posted on my channel here, and it's a video of Dan Wallace. And if you don't know who Dan Wallace is, he's one of the leading Greek scholars of the world. He runs the Center for New Testament Manuscripts. Really a cool guy, and I have nothing against him personally, but he's said some things about the New King James that I would tend to disagree with. And I'm going to play actually the clip of the video so you can watch it in here. And then I'm going to come back and we can discuss what he says in that video. So go ahead and here's the clip.
The New King James Version, done in 1982, is a curiosity. Now, I'm going to say some things that are negative about it. But the reason I'm saying that is because I worked on it. I was Arthur Farstad's assistant for quite some time. He was the senior editor of the New King James Bible, and I did a lot of the proofreading and a little bit of the editing. And basically, the New King James takes exactly the same Greek and Hebrew text as the King James Bible took and gives it a modern translation. The kind of translation it does, they had a lot of scholars. A lot of these scholars worked on some of these other translations. The basic kind of translation that the New King James Version has is along the lines of the New American Standard. It's not as elegant as the ESV. It's not quite as rigid as the New American Standard Bible. The problem with it is its textual basis is so bad. Now, it's not that it's heretical. It's just, why use a Bible that in 5,000 places isn't the Word of God when you could use one that is the Word of God in those 5,000 places? It just makes no sense to me. And yet, Christian after Christian loves the New King James Bible. They say, oh, but I just love this translation. I know it's inferior in terms of its textual basis, but whatever it's translating is really good. Well, then use an ESV. Then you'll have a much better textual basis, and you've got great notes. It troubles me that we want these things just because of how it sounds rather than because of the textual basis on which it's based. Again, I worked on the New King James Version. In fact, I was kind of the watchdog to make sure the translators were translating from the Textus Receptus. In one or two places they weren't. They used a modern Greek text, and I really nailed these guys. I said, no, that's not right. You got to do the TR. So not a single one of the translators, not a single one of the editors of the New King James Bible thinks that the Greek text that they translated is the best one available today. Not one of them. And over 100 scholars worked on this. They just wanted to do it so it was in line with the old King James. So it's a throwback, it's a nostalgia thing that I just think we need to get past.
Okay, so, Dan Wallace, he has a unique perspective more than others in the sense that he actually helped work on the New King James. And so that does give him a level of authority. He's not just some average person that just made a video one day talking about why, like myself, talking about why I like or dislike a certain thing. In reality, someone like me doesn't have any weight and shouldn't have any weight, as far as our opinions go on these things. But, Dan Wallace is one of those guys that very influential, quite literally wrote the book on Greek grammar. He wrote an intermediate grammar called Greek Grammar Beyond the Basics, and it's a staple. It's still used today in seminaries. And it's an excellent book. I recommend you get it. But anyway, as you saw in that video, he mentioned that he was the assistant to the editor-in-chief or the general editor of the New King James, namely Arthur Farstad. And he mentions, though, that I think his wording was that the New King James is a curiosity. Now, I actually understand and I sympathize with Dan Wallace in this. Dan Wallace is coming from a critical text background. That is, he prefers the text that is found in the we'll just use text type Alexandrian family of manuscripts. Those would be those manuscripts that tend to come out of Alexandria, Egypt. They tend to be older. However, they tend to be much fewer in nature. There aren't nearly as many of them as there are of other manuscripts of the New Testament, Greek manuscripts, that is. But Dan Wallace, like I said, is a critical text guy. And so he would believe that those manuscripts that come out of Alexandria are more authoritative than the manuscripts that the New King James would primarily be translated from. Now, he mentioned this too, that there's a myth going around that the New King James was not translated from the Textus Receptus, that is the same Greek text that the King James is translated from. And he actually points out that that's not true. It actually was translated from the Textus Receptus. If there are points of variation, typically it's found that the reason for that variation from the New King James to the King James has to do with one of two issues. It either has to do with translation philosophy, that there is we've increased our knowledge in how to translate certain things in Greek. And so maybe it's a translational choice, whereas the text underlying it is the same. Or the second issue is usually that the New King James in a couple of places the King James did not match the Textus Receptus from which it was based upon. And the reason for that is often has been pointed out that the translators of the King James were more familiar and comfortable with Latin. And in some places they made, conjectural emendations, that is, decisions that weren't necessarily based upon any Greek text. So there are some places like that where, yes, the New King James does differ from the King James. However, it is not because it's based upon a different text. They are based upon the exact same texts, okay? Both in the Old Testament with the Masoretic text and in the New Testament having to deal with the Textus Receptus, right? The received text. So Dan Wallace points that out, right off the bat. However, like I said, the reason that Dan Wallace primarily does not like the New King James has to do with the fact that, like I said before, he's a critical text guy. And the truth is, if you are someone like that, right, I'm not a critical text guy, but if you do believe that the critical text is the most accurate text, then I would agree with Dan that you would want a translation of the Bible that is based upon the most, what you believe the most accurate text to be. And in his case, he believes it to be the critical text. But here's where I would disagree with Dan Wallace, okay? And this really comes into why I like the New King James, which really was the whole premise of this video, why do I like it? Is the fact that in many ways, I think the New King James, Dan Wallace called it, sort of more or less a piece of history. It's a kind of archaic, something that we should set aside, move past. But something about the New King James, which I think sets it apart from virtually every other translation, is that it is really the best translation of all possible worlds. So the text, what do I mean by that? The text that it's translated from is the Textus Receptus, correct? Like I said, the text compiled by Desiderius Erasmus. And I myself am not the biggest fan of the Textus Receptus. Not necessarily because I dislike it, I just don't think it's the most accurate. I would be somewhere along, I believe in what's called the majority text, okay? Or another way of wording it would be the Byzantine text. Now there is some distinction between the majority text and the Byzantine text, but for the moment I'm going to treat them as synonymous, okay? They're more or less the same thing. Now, I would be in that camp, right? Now, the New King James does something unique, that it is translating in the text itself it's translating from the Textus Receptus. But what they did is they put these footnotes whenever the Textus Receptus varies from the Byzantine or majority text. And they put it down there at the bottom in the margin. That will tell you, well, the Textus Receptus in the text will say this, but they'll put a footnote. You go down there and you go, well, the majority text says this. And it's a disagreement. But they didn't just stop there. They also put at the bottom of the page all the points of variation, at least the major points of variation, where the Textus Receptus varies from the critical text. Now, why do I really like this and think this is significant? Why does this set the New King James apart from basically every other modern translation? The reason is because you are getting, in a simple, easy-to-use guide, essentially a apparatus at the bottom of your Bible that shows you where all of the major Bible variations vary from each other. All the translations vary. So let's say you're in a church that uses the critical text and you're using the New King James, and you're reading along and you notice that there's a difference when the pastor was reading. Let's just say he's reading from the NASB, okay? You notice that all of a sudden, oh, there was something different about that. You can look down at the footnote of your New King James and see the variation, and it'll tell you. The critical text says this, okay? Or let's say you're reading along and you see you're very traditional, you're used to the King James, the way it's wording, and you're reading in your New King James, and you notice that there's another footnote. And you go down there and it tells you that the Byzantine text actually omits that certain verse, that it's not found, that verse, whatever one in question, for example, most famous one would be the, Johannine comma, the 1 John 5:7, the three that bear witness in heaven, the Spirit, the Father, the Spirit, and the Word, these three are one, something like that. Anyway, it'll tell you that the majority of New Testament manuscripts do not include that verse. And it's, stuff like that. So that really sets the New King James apart, in my mind, from basically every other edition. Now, as I'm saying this, it's a little bit hypocritical of me in the sense that the next question that you would ask you would think that I would be someone that primarily uses the New King James almost exclusively as my English Bible. And the truth is I don't. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Mainly because for starters, I use, since I learned Greek, I don't necessarily rely so much upon English translations as much. Of course I still use them, and typically when I do use one, I find that I use the New American Standard, and it really, this is the hypocritical part, is because that's the one I'm the most familiar with, that I grew up reading, and it's the one I like. So it's when I sound, even when I'm translating in some ways, I'll translate it in my head, from the Greek. I'll translate it and it'll sound more like the New American Standard. It's what I'm familiar with. And so for me, I've tried a couple times to switch the New King James for, as my daily driver, and I just have a more difficult time with that. But the point is that I still think that the New King James has a very, very, very important place in modern Bibles, because no other Bibles really have the level of footnotes that the New King James does. Now, as I say that, let me clarify really quick. The Berean Standard Bible online, made by Bible Hub, has excellent footnotes, and they are actually very good, if not on the same level as the New King James. But the problem I have with the BSB is that there's only one printed version available, and it's not really the best quality. And so unless you're only using a digital Bible, the BSB, as much as I love it, I really do love that. If you'd like to see a video about that, by the way, let me know. But, another Bible translation that has excellent footnotes would be the NET, the New English Translation. And that Bible was unique because it was made by Dan Wallace. And it was really put out as to be the first available digital Bible, if I'm not mistaken. And its footnotes really are fantastic as far as the knowledge that's in there, the information. But the footnotes, though, are slanted more towards a critical text perspective because, Dan Wallace put them out. So, and again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you happen to be in that camp, that's fantastic, and I have no issues with that. I just, I would disagree with it, but I don't have an issue with somebody who does hold to that position. But anyway, so both of those are two editions that do have excellent footnotes. But as far as mainstream in publication, a common Bible that people use, the New King James, I think, has the best footnotes amongst all versions, really. So, that's something else that I like about the New King James. A brief comment, and this has to do, like I said, with its footnotes again, is that the New King James gives more information about the amount of variation amongst manuscripts. For example, the New American Standard or the ESV, for example, with the longer ending of Mark. Some people say we should just call it the ending of Mark, and that's right, but, people say, the longer ending, and that's what we're referring to. But, the ESV and the New American Standard say some manuscripts include this. But the New King James, I like how it says all manuscripts, or virtually all except two manuscripts omit this, or all manuscripts except for two include the longer ending of Mark, and the two that omit it primarily are Codex Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. So, of course, the two famous ones, the heavyweights. But anyway, I really like the clarity that the New King James brings to the table. I just think it's the more open and honest a translation is, the better it is. And it's one of those things that it's almost like the New King James is a moderating position between two worlds. The King James only guys hate it, though, because they think that it's trying to corrupt their people and steal them away from using the King James. And the critical text guys don't really like it, like Dan Wallace, because they think it's a sort of a cop-out sort of, or a compromise. And he points out that none of the translators on the team believed that the Textus Receptus was the accurate text to use. And, that's a fair criticism. But again, they did it because they knew that people did believe that the Textus Receptus is the correct text. And it was trying to be faithful, that it is an update of the King James. However, I don't think it was really a compromise, because they did put in the footnotes showing the variation, the absolute honesty of the translators to do that. And I applaud them for that. And really, I applaud them more than any other modern translation, because nobody else did it on that level of the New King James. So anyway, all that being said, that's just my thoughts on it. If you like the New King James, let me know, comment below. Or if there's another Bible translation you want to see, or any other thing, video in particular, feel free to comment. I love this kind of stuff. So anyway, I hope this helped you guys out, and God bless you guys. And once again, real quick, no hate on Dan Wallace. I really like him. I respect him. I would love to get to meet him. He seems like a really nice guy. My dad's met him a couple times, and he said he's super nice. Sharp as a tack, really smart. But, just because I disagree with him here in this area doesn't mean I hate him. So just wanted to throw that out there again. So anyway, God bless you guys. I'll talk to you later, and bye-bye.